I mean, that just sounds repulsive.
Yeah. No, I don't get that at all.
And the winner of the greatest products of all time.
It's so they don't roll off your desk.
Guess who the president was on the $500 bill?
Their orange sherbet was fantastic.
If I had one, I could blow it right now.
Was their spokesman Kevin Bacon? Hey, smart Drivel fans. We're coming to you from, cyber world, cyberland to give you another episode of Smart Drivel. Kurt Schneider here.
Jon Ellenthal here. Hello, Kurt.
Hi, John. Nice to digitally see you.
Always nice to digitally see you. I think we're getting close to when we can actually record together in person in the same place. And I can't wait.
Me too, John. Me too.
So, Kurt, we have another fun topic to dig into. Would you like to tell our listeners what we're going to spend this episode on?
I will, but before we do that, I feel it is my Smart Drivel mandate to share things when I find them. And I found something really, really interesting today about pencils, John.
Pencils.
Yeah. First of all, the eraser on a pencil was not invented until like 100 years ago, 115 years ago, and it's a discreetly American invention.
That's because Americans didn't start making mistakes until 150 years ago, Kurt.
But European pencils still don't have erasers on them, most of them.
That is profoundly arrogant. Just use a pen. If you don't want to have the opportunity to change what you wrote, why would you use a pencil without an eraser? Just use a pen.
I use a pen for crosswords. So I'm going to give you a few quick facts about pencils. Then we're going to move on to today's topic. First of all, why do you think they're hexagonal? Hexagonal? Why do they have 6 sides? Yeah.
I think that's because if you ever cannot find an Allen wrench, you just cut off the tip of the pencil. You have a ready-to-go Allen wrench. Is that correct?
No, that's a good idea, though. It's so they don't roll off your desk.
Oh, very smart. Especially if your desk is not flat.
And why? Why are they yellow?
Because they match the school bus, Kurt.
Well, that's a great idea, too. But no, it's because most of the graphite and the best graphite for pencils comes from China. And in China, yellow is the color of royalty. So that's why the pencils are yellow.
Yeah, we discussed previously that they're coated by like 11 coats of whatever the pencil paint is. Despite that, most people have no problem chewing through them or biting through them. But that stuff doesn't chip unless you put it up against your teeth. Kurt, I gave you an opportunity to talk about today's episode. You chose, which I support your choice, to talk about pencils. So I am going to tell our listeners about today's episode, okay?
Before you do that, I have one more fact about pencils.
I apologize for prematurely ending the pencil discussion, please.
How long of a distance do you think one pencil could draw a line?
That's a very good question. And that's actually a really good Smart Drivel question. So
yeah.
I think, obviously, you would need interim sharpenings.
Yes.
Okay, it's not just on one sharpen, it's the entirety of the pencil.
Yes.
I think you could go 100 miles.
Ooh, wow. On one pencil.
Very light touch, maybe. What's the answer?
35 miles.
Okay, I'd like to point out that while my guess is wrong, I'm feeling okay about it.
You should. And how many words do you think a single pencil could write?
Well, clearly 35 miles worth of words.
Yeah, 45,000.
All right, well, those are really good fun facts. And in an effort to transition to today's episode, I'll tell you that while pencils are still available, there are a lot of other products out there that you and I grew up with that we used and enjoyed that are gone. They're gone. They have been discontinued. You cannot get them. You cannot buy them. You cannot use them anymore. And we're going to dedicate the balance of this episode to talking about products that don't exist anymore.
I love it. I'm ready to go.
Not including the pencil, which still exists. So, Kurt, why don't you kick us off with a fabulous product that no longer exists?
Well, here's one that I had, and I think we've even mentioned it on previous podcasts, and you probably did too, but everyone from our youth seemed to have the big wheel.
Oh, big wheels keep on turning. I had a big wheel. And the first time in my life that I was exposed to larceny was when my big wheel, I was probably 7 or 8 years old, was stolen from our backyard. We lived in a development where all the houses were sort of connected. It looked like a bunch of monopoly houses. Someone came into our backyard and stole my big wheel.
But maybe they were doing you a favor because you shouldn't be on a big wheel at 8 years old. You should be on a bike by then.
Well, I think I was about 8. I don't remember what was age appropriate for. Are you suggesting that I was late in developing my bike riding skills?
Yes. I think 5 years old is probably the maximum on the big wheel.
Wow. All right. Well, I'd love to hear from our listeners how old they were when they rode a big wheel. And I would not be surprised if I stopped by your house later today and I saw you tooling around your driveway on a big wheel, Kurt. It would not surprise me at all.
The biggest adventure I ever had on a big wheel when I lived in Tokyo and I was 5 years old. My brother and I left the apartment and rode. He rode a bike and I rode my big wheel downtown in Tokyo, a bunch of streets to a park where we could go up and down. It's like a modern skate park, but it was a big wheel park or bike park.
A big wheel park. Those are the predecessors of these skate parks. How about that?
Exactly.
When you got off your big wheel and you went inside and you said, "Hey, Mom, why does a pencil have 6 sides?" What did she say to you? Where should you go look it up?
In an encyclopedia.
That is correct. So before Google, our parents repeatedly told us when we had a question about how something works or how something happened historically was to go look it up in Encyclopedia Britannica. Encyclopedia Britannica survived for 234 years. It was actually founded in 1766, and it lasted all the way until 2010 when Google came around, right before 2000 and destroyed the need to look anything up. You and I both read a newsletter called Morning Brew, which we highly recommend. And they did a fun bracket of the greatest products of all time. And the winner of the greatest products of all time was Google search. And one of the victims was Encyclopedia Britannica. I mean, people used to sell them door to door for a living.
Yeah, I had a complete set from my great uncle of an 1891 Encyclopedia Britannicas, which have been lost somewhere, somehow. I don't have them. But in my family growing up, maybe because my father was too cheap to buy a new set, the ones that we used were the 1948 World Book. So some of my answers in the 70s that I brought in, 1948, I think we only had 48 states back then. I mean, things were way off that I was looking up.
Have you subsequently updated yourself on what happened between 1948 and the 1970s?
The Google helped me.
So it's not just a dark period in Kurt's historical. We had a complete set too. And it's just amazing how something that was such an important part of American life that a lot of families dedicated serious shelf space to Britannica completely wiped out.
Interestingly, when we would finish doing that and our parents would say, "Let's go on a little road trip," we would invariably, like the rest of Americans, stop off the highway at a place called Howard Johnson's.
Hojo's.
Yes.
I love Hojo's.
Their orange sherbet was fantastic. And Howard Johnson's no longer exist. They were not a good restaurant, but we ate in them. All of us did.
The Mets also had a third baseman in the 80s named Howard Johnson.
Yes.
And he is no longer playing baseball either, so I guess he is no longer available.
I had a great Howard Johnson story. I was on a Cub Scout trip in the 70s. We went to spend the weekend up in some naval thing in Connecticut and on a boat. And on the way back, we stopped at a Howard Johnson's. My father took us up there. He was sleeping on the boat with us and a bunch of guys. And my father called over the waitress and said, "Excuse me, miss, this is the worst damn coleslaw I've ever had in my life. It's etched in my brain forever."
Didn't you just want to disappear and you shrink into your chair when your parents complain about something? I've seen my kids do it. When I do it, I hope I do it very nicely. In any event, coleslaw is never the same for you, unfortunately.
No.
So I think Superman would have a big problem today because you'll recall that when Superman needed to go from Clark Kent into Superman, he would step into a phone booth, change his clothes, I guess, emerge as Superman, and take off and fly to the site of trouble. There are no more phone booths. There may be some phone booths that are just out there as legacies that are not maintained anymore, but we're not putting phone booths out anymore. They certainly survive in movies because a lot of very important phone calls took place in phone booths. It always seems to be raining when people get into a phone booth. But when do you think the last time you actually made a phone call, Kurt, from inside a phone booth?
I cannot tell you how long. 20 years, maybe. And what I'm worried about is how will Maxwell Smart get into the headquarters?
I mean, Maxwell Smart and Get Smart. And as you get older, you think back on it and you realize that there were so many allegorical things like, he worked for an organization called Control. The enemy was called Chaos.
Yeah.
I was watching that as a little kid. I wasn't picking up any of that, although I was quite mesmerized by Barbara Feldman. Feldman? Barbara Feldman?
Yes.
Agent 99?
Yes. Do you know who the creators and head writers were of Get Smart?
I did, but please remind me.
Mel Brooks and Buck Henry, two of the funniest human beings around. All right.
What is the largest bill denomination you carry around?
100, Franklin.
I will occasionally have a $100 bill as well, although it's not the most convenient form. Although it's nice because it takes up, it only takes up one bill. But there used to be, Kurt, a $500 bill. Now, it sounds like you and I would not be trading the $500 bill, given our preferences, but there was a $500 bill. It was discontinued in 1969. And guess who the president was, or the person was? I'll give you a hint. It was a president on the $500 bill. I do not believe you'll guess it.
Calvin Coolidge.
That's not it. I'll give you a hint that will make it solvable. He was assassinated in office.
McKinley?
McKinley is correct. So believe it or not, President William McKinley graced the $500 bill, which was in circulation until 1969. McKinley.
Yeah, probably not a lot of usage for that bill.
Well, that could be why they discontinued it, Kurt.
So if we're talking about brands that no longer exist, what's interesting is I started thinking about it. I was like, I have an old car, which is a Buick. Buick does exist, but its counterpart, Oldsmobile, doesn't exist. Pontiac doesn't exist from General Motors. Plymouth doesn't exist. Mercury doesn't exist. Saturn doesn't exist. AMC doesn't exist. And remember the Pacer and all that? And the Gremlin
too, right?
Yeah. And Yugo doesn't exist. So a lot of car brands that people spent a boatload, I guess a carload of money on marketing.
Many billions. A lot of those brands were around for a long time. And I think of a brand like Saturn, which was a relatively new brand. And you remember that it was introduced to great fanfare. They had a whole different way of doing things. You didn't negotiate the price. You went into the dealer and the price was the price and all that kind of good stuff. And I think a lot of people liked Saturn. So I guess it was just financially not viable at some point. But a lot of those are venerable brands. But Saturn sort of came and went pretty quickly.
I feel bad for the Oldsmobile and the Plymouth and the Pontiac. Pontiac Firebird was what the cool kids drove in high school.
Another brand that came and went pretty quickly, like Saturn, is a brand that you probably don't even know. I don't think most people do. It's a brand called 6 Degrees. And everybody knows Facebook. And some people know earlier social networks like Friendster or MySpace. But the first social network was actually called 6 Degrees. And it's just so interesting that, look, Facebook is one of the world's biggest companies, right? One of the world's most valuable companies. And these people at 6 Degrees had pretty much the same idea, but for a variety of things, this alchemy and luck and timing and the right tactics, they didn't become Facebook, even though they were there first. So a lot of times it's not the first. It's someone who's come along and said, hey, I can do that too, only a little bit different or at a slightly different time.
Was their spokesman Kevin Bacon?
I don't believe they had 6 Degrees, but I bet you that's where the name came from. That's quite clever, Kurt. That's almost certainly where it came from. Well done. But there's a great backstory to 6 Degrees, or maybe it's a postscript. They actually created what are considered to be the foundational patents for social networking. And when 6 Degrees went out of business, their patents were available for sale. And two now well-known entrepreneurs, Reid Hoffman, who was starting LinkedIn at the time, and Mark Pincus, who was the founder of Zynga, decided to cobble together enough money to buy them. And they bought the patents for $700,000, these foundational patents in social networking. And they ultimately made a deal with their friends at Facebook for those patents. And they turned that $700,000 into who knows how much Facebook stock. 6 Degrees didn't survive as a viable operating company, but their patents did survive, and they created enormous value for their owners.
Yeah. Wow.
I not have gotten the Kevin Bacon thing. What is wrong with me?
I don't know.
Wow, that's a big miss.
Let's bring our listeners back to the 70s where we grew up. Let's talk about some candy and treats that we ate back then that don't exist. So I'm just going to give you a bunch of them, but they don't exist anymore. The Reggie Bar.
I remember the Reggie Bar, named, of course, after Reggie Jackson. And he was one of the first to recognize that his brand transcended baseball and his sport. And he sought licensing opportunities beyond his course. So the bar didn't survive, but the model that Reggie was working on certainly has.
For sure. What about the Marathon Bar?
I loved Marathon bars. We should bring that back, Kurt. They
Remember
were like
the commercials?
Lace thing, and they had caramel in there. You know what? We should go buy the brand right now from whomever owns it and reintroduce the Marathon bar.
Remember the commercials?
No.
They were these Western commercials, and the idea was it took so long to eat a Marathon bar that like you were tied up and you were waiting to like get killed, and everyone fell asleep because it took you so long. Then you could escape.
I don't remember the commercials, but I do remember that Marathon meant it took a long time. And unlike the pencil, which lasts for 35 miles, the Marathon bar only takes you 26.2 miles to eat.
No, 26.2 is a marathon. I get where you're going there.
I know. I'm just saying the pencil out.
I get it. I get it. That's good. You're bringing it back together.
A little bit of a callback there, Kurt.
So what about Hostess Chocodiles?
Is that the one with peanut butter?
No, it is a Twinkie that's got chocolate all over, wrapped in chocolate or encased in chocolate.
Once again, I wonder what I was thinking when you said Chocodiles, and I went with peanut butter.
I don't know what's going on today.
You know what? My synapses are not firing all that perfectly at the moment.
Well, we have talked in the past about a brand that my brother and I loved in the 70s called Kugel that you had never heard of, but it got discontinued. It was owned by Kraft, and it was a peanut butter spread.
What was wrong with peanut butter?
It was basically Nutella before Nutella. It was chocolate peanut butter and banana peanut butter and cinnamon peanut butter.
But again, that's a good example, just like 6 Degrees and the others, that you can have the right idea, but not build a successful and enduring business out of it because your timing could be off or there could be something wrong in your execution. So it just shows you that having a really good idea is a small part of creating something that creates lasting value.
Yeah, it's called luck.
Well, I think luck has a lot to do with it. And I think it's hard to admit that because a lot of people work really hard on these things and you can't account for luck. So that's sort of a little bit scary. What else you got on your 70 snack list?
Well, that's about it. I don't think chiclets are still around.
Oh, not really? No chiclets?
And I don't think Swanson TV dinners are still around.
Well, that has become a giant category. Look at the frozen food category. Yeah. The microwave obviously changed the game because who wanted to wait 35, 40 minutes for that turkey thing to get warmed up? So,
and Trader Joe's, you can go in there, fill your cart with all sorts of frozen stuff and be fine forever.
Like the Saturn, here's something that came and went pretty quickly, except in this case, we're very happy that it came and went very quickly. We were very happy when it started. And we were very happy at the end when it left. And that was the dial-up modem. So back in the early 90s, when AOL was carpet bombing America with those discs and free 1,080 hours of service, you would have like 14.4 band modems and it would go while the handshake took place. And then you'd watch your page load in sections. So it was incredibly thrilling because we were at the birth of the consumer internet.
Yeah.
You didn't have to use that all that long to go, hey, faster and broadband is a whole lot better. I don't miss dial-up modems, Kurt, but they are gone.
They're totally gone. There's a lot of that as technology goes forward. So same thing, Kodak film does not exist anymore because we have these things called our phones that are more used for texting and internet and pictures.
Yeah, what's funny?
And we also used to drive through and drop off that Kodak film at a photo mat. You remember those little boutique things?
They were in parking lots and they were like little huts you could drive by.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it's funny that we even call the phone because talking on it is probably not the primary use for most people. I mean, that camera is probably, there are a lot of features on it, but the camera is probably a bigger deal to most people than the phone itself. And of course, if we're talking about film, you got to look at Polaroid cameras, which were an incredible revolution back in 1947 when they were introduced. And they're long gone for the same reasons.
They're back.
Right? They came back as a little bit of a retro thing, but they're not a mass market thing anymore.
They are digital now, which is kind of defeats the purpose. So
you know what else is gone thanks to the internet? You and I probably, as younger people, called 1-900 numbers. And the two primary use cases for 900 numbers were one, there was sports phone, where you could get all sorts of sports scores in real time. And some guy in a recorded voice would say, in the fourth inning, the Mets are beating the Cardinals 2-1. And it was the way that you got real-time-ish sports update.
You paid for it.
And paid for it. A 900 number basically was billed to your phone. And of course, porn, because porn seems to be the first commercial use case for pretty much every new communication technology, as we saw with the internet as well. But 900 numbers used to be a big thing. You'd call a number, they would give you information or entertainment, and your phone bill would be charged for the number. And I think the last 900 number was retired by Verizon like in 2012. So 900 numbers gone.
Can you still dial 411 from a payphone and get someone's phone number? I guess not.
I totally believe you can. But here's what you can't do. And you and I probably never did this or would never want to. You can no longer buy celery-flavored Jell-O, which was discontinued, fortunately, right before we were born in 1964. Can you think of any reason that anyone would want to make or eat celery Jell-O? Celery-flavored Jell-O?
No.
I mean, that just sounds repulsive.
Yeah. No, I don't get that at all.
Talking of food, you had that great list of snacks. You cannot buy from McDonald's a fried apple pie anymore, a hot apple pie. Maybe
can't
burn. So, remember you have that little container on the flap. It would say, caution, contents are hot.
Yes.
Those, of course, the contents are hot because it's a fried apple pie, but they don't sell those anymore. Those were delicious, I think.
They were absolutely great. I loved them. They probably, if you look at the fat content, not too good. So
I don't think they were healthy. But what else do you have that just has to be mentioned?
Well, just that the internet knocked out some amazing retail and Amazon retail stores we used to go to, right? There's no more Woolworths. And do you remember the smell in the Woolworths when you'd go in? Oh my goodness. It was plastic, I think was the smell.
But I can still see along one of the sides of the store, the little luncheonette counter with the spinning round stools that were affixed to the floor.
Yeah. Yeah, it was the 5 and dime. So no more Woolworths, no more Toys R Us, no more Borders, no more Blockbuster, no more Tower Records.
Retail-ageddon.
No more Crazy Eddies. Remember those commercials?
Prices were insane.
And The Whiz.
Christmas in July. And The Whiz.
And Circuit City. I mean, all these electronic stores.
Yeah, look, there's been a lot of retail brands that have gone out.
All right, we got to wrap up.
I got a couple more for you before we wrap up because they just need to be mentioned. We don't have to dwell on them. The rotary telephone.
Gone. The Princess phone, remember that?
Oh, yes, the Princess phone. But rotary telephone gone, VCRs gone, a lot of things that were a big part of our... How about for a brief, shiny moment, everyone was buying a GPS device and sticking it on their windshield?
Yeah.
The phone and Waze and infotainment systems in cars. You know, here's one when back in your snack foods. In fact, perhaps if I had one, I could blow it right now and it would signal the end of our episode because you can no longer buy a whistle pop. Remember those lollipops that were also a whistle and you could blow it?
Yes.
I think we need to blow the whistle pop, Kurt, on this episode.
I think so. That's a great way to end. Well, this was a fun trip down memory lane of brands that no longer exist that we used to like, except for the celery Jell-O.
Yes, and you can no longer buy a Crayola crayon in dandelion color. But yeah, the celery Jello, we never got our chance. It was retired right before we were born. Well, this was fun. I hope our listeners enjoyed it as much as we did, Kurt. You and I will be back next week with another brand new episode of Smart Drivel. Until then, Kurt and I hope your life is filled with Smart Drivel. Goodbye, Kurt. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, John. Bye, everyone.